Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, breaking news in the last hour or so is that Ken Livingstone, after many decades of on-off membership, has resigned from the Labour Party as part of the row over comments he made and the anti-Semitism allegations against him and the party, and more on that over the course of the next hour. Now, perhaps the main story tonight I want to discuss is not a surprise, given, of course, that last week the Scottish Parliament voted against the government's European Union withdrawal bill. On the back of that, Nicola Sturgeon, the leader of the Scottish National Party, has taken this a whole stage further. Here she was yesterday morning talking on the ITV Peston show.
I guess if there is to be another EU referendum, whether on the principle or on the terms of a deal, a big question for Scotland would be what happens if we get the same outcome, where the UK votes to leave as a whole, but Scotland votes to remain, because that's what's happened the last time. It's not a question of the people of Scotland changing their mind. So how do we make sure that Scotland's voice actually gets listened to and respected? So, you know, the SNP is not a block to this, but I think there are others who perhaps need convincing.
So Nicola Sturgeon is the leader of the SNP. She's the First Minister in Scotland. And let's just be completely clear about this. She rejects the result of the 2014 Scottish referendum, which was about independence from the UK. And I'll come back to that word, independence, in a moment. She rejects that and would like another referendum on that. But, of course, that's linked to the fact that she also rejects the result of the 2016 UK-wide referendum on leaving the European Union. So she wants a second referendum on the European Union, and if the UK votes again and votes to leave again, she wants another referendum in Scotland so that they can vote to leave the UK. I think that's about right. So Nicola Sturgeon is not really calling for one referendum. She's calling for two more referendums because she rejects both of the 14 and 16 results. What do I think about all that? Well, number one, she's beginning to me to look like a pretty bad loser. I would also say, I think amongst the Scottish electorate, she's perhaps got a bigger problem than she thinks, given that actually a third of SNP voters voted Brexit. So there is not this overwhelming pro-EU view in Scotland that many would have you believe. And I just can't stand the use of this word independence. The Brexit referendum was about independence. Are we better off being independent of the political structures of the European Union and making our own laws, or are we better off being part of a bigger club? I've tried to put that as dispassionately as I can. We voted for independence. What the Scots were voting for, and 45% of them did agree with this, is that they'd leave the United Kingdom but still be part of the European Union. That is not independence. I've said this till I'm blue in the face. I wonder whether I'm the only person in the whole of the UK that thinks that the use of independence in reference to Scotland is a complete, total and utter misnomer. I'll find out perhaps over the course of the next hour whether I am alone on that or not. So far, Downing Street have been fairly straightforward, and they've said there is no need for another divisive referendum. And of course, she can't have this referendum legally unless it's sanctioned by the UK government. I think Downing Street personally have said the right thing. But I want to know from you, do you think Scotland deserves another referendum once the Brexit deal or even second referendum result is finally revealed? And if you think, yep, OK, fair dues, it's been 4 years since they had a referendum, it's time they had another go, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Or perhaps like me, you think, hang on, it wasn't the best of three. You know, both of these significant referendums that took place have to last for several years. Otherwise, the whole process of having a referendum wouldn't have much validity, in which case text to 84850. Maybe you think she's a bad loser, as I do. Maybe you think actually circumstances have changed and she might win a referendum next time round, in which case, of course, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And you can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. Let's go to Blair, who's calling from Camberley. Good evening, Blair.
Good evening. I'd just like to say straight away I voted for Brexit, and I agree with most of your policies, but in this particular instance I'm afraid not. Scotland's entitled to hold its referendum any time it likes. You well know the people in Scotland are sovereign, unlike in England. England are subjects. The sovereign people of Scotland are entitled to hold a referendum every other day of the week if they want, without you or anyone else in England.
Well, Blair, hang on. I mean, two things. Why do you see the people of Scotland constitutionally as being different? I mean, in terms of the monarchy, I mean, she's the Queen of Scotland as well, you know.
Well, if you read the Act of Union, you'll see the people of Scotland are sovereign, where the people in England are subjects. Now, the thing is, Nigel, you know and I know the whole thing behind us. If England lost Scotland, they lost the oil, the gas, they lost all Scotland's wealth. And this is what they're terrified of. And England, I doubt if England could survive without Scotland, but Scotland can certainly survive without England.
Oh, Blair, I don't think I agree with that. I think if you look at the amount of money that is spent per capita by the government in Scotland, it's a lot higher than it is in England. And actually, Blair, you would find right now in Camberley, if you went to your local boozer, you would find people in there who've actually in the last 2 decades become quite resentful of the amount of English taxpayers' money that's gone to Scotland.
Listen, Nigel, Scotland's been bankrolling. Have you heard of the Macron report?
Yes, I have.
Scotland's been bankrolling England for years.
It's fantasy economics, Blair. It's complete fantasy economics.
No, it's not.
And you're giving the Alex Salmond argument. But I tell you what, Blair, rather than arguing about oil revenues, and I will grant you that oil is now back to $80 a barrel, although all of Salmon's projections were based on $110 a barrel, but no matter. Let's not argue the economics, because you and I are never going to agree on that. But does it make sense, Blair? Does it make sense for Sturgeon's wish for Scotland to break away from the UK and to be part of the European Union? Is that independence?
Well, 2 weeks ago in Glasgow, there was 80,000 people marched for independence. You never reported it, of course. Almost the same amount that was at
But it's not independence, Blair, is it?
It's independence.
No, now come on. No. You voted Brexit, Blair. You cannot be...
I agree with you there.
But you cannot... The point I'm making is, if Salmond and now Sturgeon genuinely want Scotland to be an independent, self-governing nation, whether I agree with it or not isn't the point. I would respect it as a point of view. What gets my goat is that they're trying to pretend they can be independent and a member of the European Union. You can't have it both ways.
I agree with you. I said they're trying to give up one master to own 27 other masters. Right. I agree with you there. 100%.
Right. Well, there you go, Blair. We finished up on a point of agreement. I'm gonna call it quits while I'm ahead on that one. Thank you very much indeed. Another Scots referendum I get on SMS. This time, could the government ask the English whether they want to keep hanging on to the moaning, miserable Scots instead of asking them whether they want to stay with us? I get from MB in Ruislip. Nigel, if Nicola Sturgeon gets another referendum and wins and separates, by her rules, the losers can come back in 4 years to ask for another referendum to reunify. How many years will this madness continue for? Mick, I'm with you. It would be, frankly, farcical to rerun a referendum after such a short period of time. In fact, what it would do is make people completely lose faith in referendums, in our political class, in the whole process by which we live our lives. Sturgeon's living in Fantasyland and seems to have forgotten Scotland had a referendum, or they've mislaid the result, says Richard from Chelsea. And Blair, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, Blair does feel the Scots have a right to do their own thing and be self-governing, but as soon as you bring in the European Union dimension, Blair starts to say, well, actually, Nigel, I agree with you. You know, it's not an honest prospectus, which is why this time Sturgeon is proposing a separate currency for Scotland. But if you apply to join the European Union, you will have to sign a commitment, and they've been very clear about this, all of them, Juncker downwards, to joining the euro. Once again, she's trying to have it both ways, not being straight with the Scottish electorate. I'm going to Dumfries to speak to Andrew. Good evening, Andrew.
Good evening, Nigel. I'm normally in Halifax, but I'm actually on holiday up here in beautiful Dumfriesshire tonight, and I'm stood in a pub in Dalbeatty.
That sounds really tough, yeah.
It's fantastic. The pub itself is festooned in red, white and blue bunting and Union flags in celebration of the royal wedding.
Very good.
And it really is a tremendous symbol, and it makes me feel very proud as somebody that puts the Union of the UK as my number one political priority. To come up here and see this. And do I think that there should be a referendum? Absolutely not. This is one United Kingdom. We voted in the EU referendum as one UK. There's no such premise as Scotland voted this or Northern Ireland voted that. We voted as a whole country to leave the EU. Scotland, by rejecting independence, or what they could term independence, laughingly, in 2014, opted to be part of a larger nation-state, and that nation-state makes decisions on a UK-wide basis.
Do you think, Andrew, that politically Nicola Sturgeon may have this very badly wrong? That actually quite a lot of Scots will say, oh, God, goodness me, we can't put up with all of this. Do you think she's made a bad political error?
Well, yes, but I think she's a very bad political person. In fact, I would go so far as to say that if she tries to go down the Catalan route of calling a referendum unilaterally, that I hope she ends up in the same position as Carlos Puigdemont, which is in exile in another country. That's how strongly I feel about this. The woman is an absolute disgrace.
Well, that's an opinion. Andrew, enjoy the heavy in that bar in Dumfries. I get by SMS, a decision has been made. They are part of the UK. Well, you're quite right, whoever you are. There was a referendum on Scottish separation from the UK. We got a result. There was a referendum on Brexit. We got a result. And Nicola Sturgeon wants to reverse both of them. In the wake of Nicola Sturgeon's call, do you think Scotland deserves another referendum once the Brexit deal is revealed? Or is she just a very bad loser who wants to reverse the results of both referendums? But before I get back to that, Ken Livingstone has quit the Labour Party. He, of course, had been suspended since 2016 over allegations of anti-Semitism following comments he made about Hitler and Zionism. Livingstone has said today he doesn't accept he's guilty of anti-Semitism or bringing the Labour Party into disrepute, but that his case has become a distraction for the party and its political ambitions. And, of course, Ken, very close to Jeremy Corbyn, has been throughout his political career. Corbyn, in turn, has said it's a sad moment, but that it was the right thing to do. I think the writing was on the wall. Baroness Chakrabarti last week, calling for his expulsion. Maybe he realised the game was up and he decided to jump before he was pushed. I, of course, have come across Ken Livingstone over the course of the last 20 years on quite a regular basis, including talking to him on this radio station, meeting him at cocktail parties, being on panel discussions with him. I've always thought Ken was affable on a one-to-one basis, but quite dangerous in his views. I take much the same view about Jeremy Corbyn, actually. I don't think as human beings they come across as awful people. I think some of their views are really, really bad. So for Ken, on a personal level, I'm sure it's a very sad day for him. He joined the Labour Party back in 1968. From the perspective of the Labour Party, well, it has to be the right thing to do, and they're probably relieved now they haven't got to expel him, which they were going to in the course of the next few weeks. But believe you me, if you think this is the end of the anti-Semitism problem in the Labour Party, you've got another think coming. There are many, many people in the Labour Party who take such a strongly pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel view, and after the last couple of weeks, that view in some quarters has got stronger, and that, I'm afraid, spills over into comments and thoughts that could quite easily be described as being anti-Semitic. It is far from over, this row, but I guess in terms of politics, it's now over for the former leader of the GLC and, of course, twice Mayor of London as well. He was an incredibly successful politician, enormously popular on the after-dinner speaking circuit, and that would be to Labour groups of people or Tory business groups of people. Ken was good at being affable. As long as you kept him off politics, he was fine, really. OK, let's go to Brechin in Angus and speak to John, who's a new caller to LBC. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So your First Minister has decided that basically both referendums need to be reversed. How do you feel about that?
I, for one, am angry as well, are many Scots, especially the ones that remain or voted to remain British. It seems to me that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP, they're sabotaging the Remain EU votes from Labour and Tory voters who voted. I voted to leave out of interest there, but the Labour and Tory who voted to remain, their votes are being stolen by SNP to try and say that they've got some kind of mandate to pull us out of Britain when we voted for that in 2014. And for me, it was real bad up here during the 2014 referendum.
Well, some of it was horrible, John, wasn't it? Some of it was. I was innocently, relatively innocently anyway, in the street in Edinburgh when a mob of people. I've never seen so many dilated pupils. They were aggressive. They were screaming. The language they used would be described, John, as extreme racism. I think in any other context. I mean, it was vile, wasn't it?
Absolutely was. I actually saw that online, and it's shameful, and that's how many of us, in fact most of us, who voted to remain part of Britain, feel about that. It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. I'll tell you what, John. I'm going to keep you there, because I've got another John on the phone who's also a new caller to LBC, and he's calling from Ayr, and I believe, John from Ayr, you've got a different point of view.
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening. So I've just had fellow Scot John from Brechin on, and he says he thinks she's a disgrace. What do you think?
I absolutely think she's not a disgrace, and I think she's doing what she's been elected to do by the Scottish electorate. Right? And can I just make a couple of points, Nigel?
Sure.
First of all, you're using language like, and this really annoys a lot of people. It's like you're saying, does Scotland deserve? Now, we don't deserve. It's not a matter of deserve, Nigel. It's not up to. And don't take this wrong, because it's not anti-English, but it's not up to the English people to decide if Scotland deserves. It's up to the Scottish people to decide that.
No, John. It's up to the national government of the United Kingdom to grant permission.
I understand this, right? But you're saying deserve, and I've heard a couple of calls quite often from yourselves and English voters and thought, Scotland doesn't deserve. Well, I think that's up to Scotland to decide, okay? And I think if you look at if you even take back to 2014, and I completely and utterly disagree that it was a nasty referendum, because I'd like to ask you, how many arrests were made in 2014?
Do you know, John?
I tell you, none.
No, John, I agree with you. A lot of people who not just confronted me, but physically threatened a taxi driver to the point where the guy was in shock and shaking and in the most awful state. Not one of them got arrested. I couldn't believe it, John, but they damn well should have been.
You also agree that nobody's arrested. I mean, on September the 19th, I can remember being at George Square in Glasgow, and riots. And all the way for the 2-year campaign, there was absolutely no trouble whatsoever. I think Jim Murphy got an egg chucked at him. Okay.
All right. I tell you what, John. Just bear with me a second. John from Brechin and Angus. I mean, I'm being told from Ayr that actually there was no trouble at all, no arrests. It was all peaceful. Everything was fine and dandy. How do you respond to that?
I mean, I'll be fair when I say that there was no real violence around where I'm from, but there were certainly communities were split apart. I've lost friends personally over the matter, and to have to go through that again when we were told it was once in a lifetime.
Absolutely.
And now here we are, a couple of years later, and she's threatening to do it again. It's ridiculous. It's uncertainty of it all. My missus is actually, she's from England herself, and she felt, like you said, she was never threatened with violence or anything, but the undertones were there from a lot of the Scottish nationalists, and they are the minority. They have been voted in with, I believe it's somewhere in the region of 44, maybe 47% if you include the Greens, into power. And I mean, you know yourself that the first past the post system, and
it's bizarre.
It's not a first past the post system in Scotland, Holyrood, though. Okay, that's where the referendum was decided in Holyrood, okay? And John
from Ayr, I mean, listen, Holyrood has an opinion on this referendum, but unless you're suggesting that she heads down the Catalonia route, and I doubt that you are...
No, Nigel, I think that's all nonsense, okay? We have a president, but can I just make a couple of points here, right?
Of course.
I'd just like to say this, right? In effect, Scotland, right, has voted twice to remain in the EU. In 2014, we were promised the only way to stay in the EU was to
in the UK. That's the point.
So we voted that.
Not
and then
Labour vote,
also in
Tory vote.
Okay, so
use them for your single-minded obsession.
Excuse me, sir. Just let me finish these points, please, okay? So we voted twice to remain within the EU, okay? Now, we also got this, we come down to to this like, oh, once in a generation. This was from an MP's opinion, okay? Alex Salmond does not decide Scotland's fate. He made his...
Do we get another referendum? If you actually get your way, do we get one
referendum? So every single day. That is democracy. Democracy never sits still. You're allowed to change your mind.
How often, John? I mean, John, I tell you what, if you lose the next referendum, how long before the next one? 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? How long would it be?
Nigel, may I just say, the next one will be when the Scottish people decide again. And if that's 10 years or 20 years, so be it. If it's 5 years, it's 5 years. But it's up to the people to decide.
Right. Well, given, John, that it was given that it was a big margin, it was 55-45, surely after 4 years it would be ludicrous to hold another referendum.
If that's the case, Nigel, right, okay, we wouldn't have sent down so many MPs. We've got a majority of the MPs in Scotland. You can pass it up any way you like. We have the majority of MPs in Scotland and in the SNP, okay? We have only...
The Scottish people voted to stay part of the United Kingdom, John.
Yes, I understand this, sir. But if you send down, for the Scottish electorate, we decided we sent down a pro-independence party. Now, we have more add up the Tories, the Lib Dems, and Labour from Scotland, and we still have a majority. Now, if we go into that, then we've got to think of the promises and everything else and the consideration.
Do you think referendums are divisive?
I am going to say this, Nigel. Referendums are meant to be divisive. Now, do they have to be nasty? No. But by their very nature, they're going to be divisive. Okay? So it's how they're conducted.
And can I just... No, fine. You know, John, I've given you lots of room. Can I just ask you one last quick point, John from Ayr? If you vote to leave the United Kingdom, but be part of the European Union, is that independence?
Yes, well, this is another point I would like to very make, and I think this is often it's seen by England. You kind of laugh at it and think, how can you be independent? Here's how you're independent and you're still within Europe. Now, if I'm in Scotland...
It's impossible, John.
Listen, Nigel, I am right now, under a Tory government, but my country has not given a mandate in about 60 years, okay? Now, if I'm an independent nation, I get the government I vote for 100% of the time, be it Lib Dem, be it...
But you become a local regional government, John, with absolutely no power at all. Your courts are overruled elsewhere. You'll be made to join the Euro. John, you cannot tell me, please do not tell me, that leaving the UK and being part of the European Union is independence.
We just now, if we have expressed our will twice to remain in Europe...
I'm not interested in that. I'm saying to you, OK, John, I'm going to have one last go at this. Can you be an independent nation and a member of the European Union?
Absolutely.
All right, fine. I'm going to leave you both there. Thank you to John in Brecon, John in Ayr, and I, for most of that, I just had to sit here and cross my arms. But it does show you passions are running very, very high north of the border. And whilst, John from Ayr is right, that the SNP have dominated the Scottish Parliament and the British Parliament in terms of representation in the most astonishing way. They have achieved amazing electoral success. Let's be fair to them. They really, really have under both of those systems, but they don't represent the entirety of Scotland. And I sometimes think that the British media portray it as if they do, and that just isn't the case. But I'm not giving up on my point. You cannot be an independent nation and a member of the European Union. It's a false prospectus, in my view, to sell that to the Scottish people. Well, Nicola Sturgeon seems to want more referendums. Another one on whether we should leave the European Union, another one on whether Scotland should separate from the UK. And I get on Twitter from somebody claiming to be Brenda from Bristol, oh God, not another one, which of course famously was what Brenda from Bristol said at the time of the last general election in June. Meanwhile, I've been commenting quite regularly on John Bercow's role as Speaker over the course of the last year and more. I feel he's not impartial. I feel he's hopelessly unsuited to that job. And of course, as you know, over the course of the last month or so, there have been repeated accusations of bullying, and then he's really come under attack for branding Leader of the House of Commons, Andrea Leadsom, a stupid woman, before reportedly adding a word beginning with F, useless, and F, outrageous. We are before the watershed. I did that with as much taste as I possibly could. Well, he's been under real fire, and it's been my feeling, I did say yesterday on the Sunday morning show that I do here on LBC, that I think actually it'd be best for him if he resigned, because frankly I think the battalions are massing against him. But today, he was up in the House of Commons defending what he'd said and his position.
I used the word stupid in a muttered aside. That adjective simply summed up how I felt about the way that day's business had been conducted. I love this
Doesn't
house.
work, does it?
I respect all of my colleagues. I hold you all in the highest esteem. It is our duty to get on with the business of Parliament. For my part, I shall continue to speak out firmly for the interests of the whole House, and if from time to time it involves publicly disagreeing with the government's management of business, then so be it.
Well, there are ways of disagreeing, aren't there? But quite how saying she's effing useless, effing outrageous and a stupid woman sums up the way you felt about the way the day's business had been conducted. I just don't know, Mr. Burko. You can try and slither away like an eel. I don't think it's working. I could be wrong, but I don't think he's going to last very long. And nor should he. We need a Speaker of the House of Commons who is utterly neutral, who doesn't have on his car, offensive, the hell with... I can't use half of this Burko language on this show, can I? But something about Brexit that was in the windscreen of his car, let alone the comments about Donald Trump, whether he likes Trump or not. So back to the Scottish debate. We had two Scottish callers on before going hammer and tongs at each other. Does it make sense? Is indeed Nicola Sturgeon right? Does Scotland deserve to have another referendum 4 years on? Let's go to Aberdeen and speak to Alan. Good evening, Alan.
Hiya, Nigel. What can I say? Sturgeon and the SNP absolutely despise the sovereign will majority. They despise us. They despise Scotland. They are destroying my country. We sacked in the referendum for Brexit, for example, UK membership, UK sovereign will. They despise that, yet they voted by a yes vote in September 2014. We'd be out of the EU already. So they should be happy they got one out of the two that they voted for. The last general election held after Brexit. Now, bear in mind, the SNP was screaming how Scotland's so pro-Brexit, pro-SNP. What happened?
Anti-Brexit, you mean, Alan?
21 of their MPs, including that Muppet Salmond. You know what I mean? That's what happened. They are divisive. They boycott Scots businesses and bit Scottish jobs if they use a Union Jack or if they say they're pro-union.
Do you know, Alan? Do you know, Alan? I was accused running UKIP of all sorts of extreme nationalisms, and none of which I believe to be true. And yet we seem to have collectively turned a blind eye to much that's been done in the name of the SNP. Do you know when I was attacked in the street, and I say this poor taxi driver who was about to pick me up was threatened, we know where you live, we're coming to get you. I mean, it was really disgusting. And do you know, Alan, the next day, Alex Salmond was asked whether he condemned the language and behaviour, and do you know what? He refused to do so.
I remember it. It was Scotland's shame yet again. What they did to you, and have done to various Scots, from the lead up to that referendum to after it, the nationalist hate that comes out of them. They go on about the far right. Well, I'll tell you what, if you want to go on the far right, you just need to look at the SNP, which puts the far right to shame in many cases.
Well, I have to say, Alan, there's and I'm sure it doesn't apply to everybody in the SNP. Certainly it doesn't.
But
they've got a fringe there. They've got a fringe there. Why, Alan? Why have the national media allowed them to behave like this? Whereas if anybody stands up and talks about the rights of the English, they're condemned as being extremists.
Well, this is what I don't understand, because the SNP, yes, they're in government, been held up by the Greens, all that, but they do not represent the vast majority of Scots. We're good neighbours with England. We like our identity as much as you do down in England or in Wales, but we're British. But what gets me is what you said to your last caller, actually. Where's the independence in Europe?
It's nonsense. Yeah. And actually, Alan, a third of her voters voted Brexit, and it's the issue. I mean, in many ways, not being able to answer the currency question made a big difference to Salmond in the referendum, and now they've got this idea of a Scottish currency and being in the EU. I mean, you couldn't laugh. Alan, tell me something. The last time I was in Aberdeen was about 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Oil had been languishing at or below $50 a barrel.
Yeah.
It had gone from boom town to ghost town.
Yeah.
Are things better up there now?
No. No, far from it. They're talking about so many jobs over the next sort of 15 years and stuff like that. The fact of the matter is that North Sea oil costs, what is it, roughly $40 a barrel to extract?
Well, more, some of it, yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, it's a false argument, this oil business. Scotland is been proven since then. We're, 13.5 billion deficit if we were an independent country. We'd be in a worse position than Greece.
Yes, you would be. That's right.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, then the European Commission would really come and take control. Alan, thank you for your passion from Aberdeen. By SMS I get, if Sturgeon and the SNP didn't have the referendum, they would have no reason to exist as a political party. I think there is some truth in that. She kind of almost has to keep calling for this. Otherwise, why are people going to go out and vote SNP? It's just interesting that it does now look, after I'm full credit, they did get to a remarkable position, but it does now look like that SNP vote is very much on the wane. Is this a new thing, that if you don't get the results you want, then you have another vote until you do, asks Scott. Well, Scott, clearly it is. She'll keep having referendums until she gets the answer she wants. Oh, no, she won't, because the UK government won't let her, in my opinion, and nor should they in this situation. Let's go to Marcus, who's calling from Stirling. Good evening, Marcus.
Good evening, Nigel. Thanks very much for taking my call.
Not one bit.
Thank you. I've got two scenarios for you, and I've been very, very keen to find out what your answers would be in these two scenarios.
Yep.
If Nicola Sturgeon was our version of you, Nigel Farage, so we've got Nicola Farage, if you can just picture that.
I'm trying for a moment. I'm trying hard, Marcus. Yeah, go on.
Oh, yes, you might need a glass of something else. If she wanted us to leave the UK and for us to leave the EU, would you have more respect for her and would you support her? And the second scenario is, if we get a Brexit in name only and our beloved Prime Minister keeps us in the single market, a lot of Scots would want a second referendum strategically so that we could have a better chance of leaving the EU as we voted for when we voted for Brexit to leave.
Well, Marcus, I will answer all of those, and thank you for those scenarios. As you say, Nicola Farage, interesting concept. I've got a cousin by that name. Right, if the Sturgeon position was that she wanted Scotland to leave the United Kingdom and to leave the European Union, to be a genuinely independent country, you asked me, would I respect that position? Yes, I would respect that for intellectual honesty and for being straight with the Scottish people. Would I support it? No. I mean, despite everything and the abuse that I've taken from some people who support that cause, I still want the Union of the United Kingdom to remain together. I genuinely do. So I would respect it. What I don't respect is this complete untruth, this false prospectus that is being sold. As far as the next scenario is concerned, if the government gets us out of the European Union in name only, but leaves us wrapped up inside, a customs union or very close to a single market, would I then be calling for another referendum? Well, I tell you what, Marcus, if the political class stitch us up that much, there wouldn't be much point in asking for it, because it simply wouldn't happen. If we come to that departure, we will need another big political revolution within the United Kingdom, a realignment of our political parties that basically would say that Brexit was just a start, a fundamental change. Marcus, great call, two great scenarios. Thank you. Does Scotland deserve another referendum on separating from the UK? But of course they wouldn't have it until she knew exactly where we were with Brexit, which she's hoping for a second referendum on as well. And some sympathy for that point of view. Andrew on Twitter says, yes, they should. The last one was to stay in the UK, which was in the EU. That is now being taken away from them against their will. Andrew, that's very much the point that she is making. The problem is that actually the idea of Scotland being out of the UK, but in the European Union, both of those markers are falling in popularity. She simply wouldn't win. That is why, of course, she's now saying Scotland would have its own independent currency, but they'd have to apply to join the European Union, and every new member state has to sign a treaty provision that says they will join the euro. So I still think they're a bit stuffed on this. Quite frankly, Brian thinks the United Kingdom ought to have a referendum when we know what the final Brexit deal is, so we got a chance to reject it, and Nick Clegg Brian would agree with you totally. Dave says, not every Scot wants to be part of Europe, but the majority of Scots want independence. Well, Dave, I don't believe that's true. I think when push comes to shove, Scots actually will want to stay part of the United Kingdom. That is my view. And also, whilst it's true that Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, it wasn't as overwhelming as it's being presented by many. And remember, there's been no significant political party north of the border making the argument, making the real Eurosceptic argument, so pro-EU have the Tories up there been for many, many years. Bruce is another new caller to LBC, and he's calling from Fife. Good evening, Bruce.
Evening, Nigel. Just wanted to raise a couple of things with you.
Please do.
I'm a new listener.
Well, you're very welcome, Bruce, and we do discuss, I promise you, I know Scotland may seem a long way away from where we're broadcasting in London, but we do care about these Scottish issues hugely on LBC.
Good. So just looking at the events of the last couple of weeks, I think this is the sort of Nicola starting to get into a little bit of difficulty. I can imagine her chewing wasps behind the curtain over the weekend watching the royal wedding. And myself...
chewing wasps. Sorry, Bruce, go on.
To my amazement, I saw some street parties, people with Union Jack bunting up, people talking about that sort of event, obviously as part of the UK. And I think really she should be thinking about changing her party's name to the Scottish Confused Party, because, as you mentioned earlier, a third of her own voters voted for Brexit.
That's right.
I myself am a Remain voter, but I don't support the SNP's view of doing things. I think they've got a hardcore element within them, like a lot of parties obviously do. They do have a lot of support. However, the hardcore element is nationalist to the way that it discusses and turns a lot of Scots off. It's anti-English. I heard live on radio recently a supporter saying that if we had another Scottish referendum, which they can't stop talking about, they would actually refuse non-Scots, however they managed to work that one out, non-Scots to have the vote. So they don't want any Lithuanians, Polish, English, anyone else who happens to live and work in the country to vote. So that's the sort of view that they have. Also, as an ex-serviceman myself, I find myself being taxed heavily on my pension, being taxed to an extent that my colleagues who left the forces at the same time aren't taxed. And some of us who are probably the people working our hardest to keep our head above water in the country, but on a day-to-day basis, we are being punished.
Well, isn't it true, Bruce? Isn't it true, Bruce, that actually, since they've run Holyrood, financially, things are pretty tough in Scotland. They're running a massive budget deficit. They're putting minimum pricing on things like alcohol. I mean, actually, isn't the truth of it, Bruce, one of the reasons they're not doing very well at the moment, and they're on the decline, is when they've had the chance to run Scotland, they haven't actually done it very well.
Well, I think I'd agree with you over the piece that they've been in charge. Absolutely, they haven't done it very well. We've seen some debacles on transport. We've seen the Forth Road Bridge closed for weeks on end before the new crossing was opened. The new crossing itself was opened. It was a farce when it was opened up. Yeah, absolutely. And they keep rolling out new ministers because, some of them have relationships with each other.
Well, Bruce, that's happened in all sorts of governments all over the world. We won't say that's exclusively an SNP thing. Let me ask you, Bruce, finally, and by the way, thank you for calling in and getting engaged in this. Let me ask you, do you think she's going to succeed in getting a second referendum on separation from the UK?
Well, I actually rather think it might be a good idea to let her have one, because I think there'll be trends.
Call her bluff. You mean call her bluff and finish the argument off?
Yeah, absolutely.
Tempting. It's tempting. It's tempting. Bruce, I thank you. And Kev says, if Scotland had separation from the UK, but stayed in the European Union, would there have to be a hard border? There you are. I wonder how much fuss Brussels would kick up over that one. How about zero? They're just doing it. They're just doing it in Ireland because they want to put the British government in a difficult position. And by the way, over the weekend, polling out in Northern Ireland to find out how many people there want to leave the United Kingdom and join a united Ireland, and it's now down to 21%. It's as low as 21%, despite all the difficulties that have been made for Northern Ireland. Let's go to June, who's a new caller, and from the south, a non-Scottish caller from Deal in Kent. Hello, June.
Hi, I am actually Scottish.
Oh, okay, right. You've kept the run going, June. Excellent. Now, being a Scot living in Deal, which is one of my favourite towns in the whole of the country, by the way, you of course didn't get a vote in the Scottish referendum, did you?
Absolutely. So people up in Scotland could vote on whether I was going to be British or not. Foreigners.
Yes, it's true. It's true. So, how do you feel now? As by the way, I hope people in Deal are nice to you, as you're Scottish.
When during the referendum, the Scottish referendum, people were actually asking me what my opinion was.
Yeah.
And when I said that, I didn't want it, they were just so relieved because they said, "You're part of us. It's part. You're part of the country." So it made me. I think a lot of people feel that the English resent them, and it's nothing but it's just not true.
Do you understand, June? Do you understand? I'm pleased to hear that, but do you understand why there are a growing number of English people who do slightly resent the way they're talked about very often by SNP leaders?
Yeah, well, that's sort of my call, because I feel that Sturgeon and Salmon have actually what they've done to my country. I'm absolutely ashamed of it. Because when I'm from Glasgow, we didn't hate anyone. We just, we welcome people. We love having visitors, and we love people with an English accent. We used to copy the English accent. So when I hear all this, it just makes me feel so embarrassed. And when I was in Scotland in the 70s, and we had a referendum, and that was the first referendum, and it was very close, but people just accepted it. But now...
we're in a very funny place, June, aren't we? I mean, we've got this, obviously, with the Brexit referendum, with a lot of very famous, big career political figures doing their best to water it down, delay it, or even get us to do it again. So we are living in a slightly different political world. But, June, it is remarkable, isn't it, that Nicola Sturgeon wants to reverse both of the referendums that we've had.
Absolutely. Yeah. By the way, Nigel, I saw you at Whitstable when you had the bonfire.
Oh, when we set fire to the boat, yes. Yes. Well, I have to say, for once I was slightly cowardly, June, and I didn't actually torch the boat myself as a protest for what's happened to the British fishing industry, but I'm pleased to say no one was arrested. June, I thank you for your call. I understand what you say. I've ever so quickly got time for Sandy, a new caller from Edinburgh. Sandy, good evening.
Good evening.
So, Sandy, we haven't got long, time has run out, but does Nicola Sturgeon deserve the chance of having another referendum?
She most definitely does.
OK, why?
Because she is speaking for the rest of us in Scotland who actually agree with almost every word that comes out that woman's mouth.
And Sandy...
Where do you get your news, Nigel, I'd like to ask?
Well, let me ask you, Sandy. Do you think Scotland, if it leaves the United Kingdom but is part of the European Union, would qualify as an independent country?
Well, yes, I do, for a start off, because of the oil, which you keep the profits from.
And you get our taxes in return. Sandy, how can you be independent if your laws are made by foreign parliament, if your own court is overruled? I mean, you can call it what you want, but it's not independence, is it?
That is a good thing. If the court overrules it,
there we are. But it's not independent, Sandy, is it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, because the European Court of Justice upholds the law for Europe.
Oh, wonderful.
Including Scotland.
Well, Nigel, Sandy, I tell you what, you clearly believe everything you've been spoon-fed by Salmond, by Sturgeon. It's not independence. It's not independence.
Sorry?
It's not independence, though, is it?
Of course it's independence.
Well,
where do you draw your line at independence? Who's governing us just now? A bunch of
Sandy, I give up. All right, I've tried ever so hard with this word independence. I think most people see the logic of what I'm saying. Maybe Andrew has really got this right. He says Sturgeon needs to concentrate on the day job as First Minister. Clearly she thinks there are more important issues than educational standards, the destruction of the Scottish fishing industry and the rising rates of violent crime. Maybe that's why she really is doing it. Maybe it's a big diversion. I don't know. I'm back tomorrow evening at 7. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick, in for Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.